It is no secret that I started this podcast as an excuse to speak to some of my favorite people more often and have a chance to just pick their brain. Welcome to another episode of Becoming Obsessed. I'm your host, Teresa Jean, and today you get to meet one of my favorite people. Jack Sellwood is the co-founder and CEO of Grapple, the world's first do-it-yourself data platform. And in his free time, he loves walks, yoga, and bikes a lot. We're also a part of Tuesday Night Dinner, TND, which I haven't talked about in a while, but it's always good to have another guest from that group. One thing that I absolutely love about you, Jack, is whenever we chat, you think about things so deeply and you just consider things and allow space for them to kind of evolve. And it feels like you don't have a ton of preconceived notions, or even if you do, you allow space for other things to come up and you really look deeper and question things. And that's something that I love so much about you and why I'm so excited to have you on the podcast. And I'm really curious, we'll get into this, how this has helped you build Grapple and be a founder. But Jack, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much, Teresa. It's awesome to be here. I always love our coffee side chats. I think we have one on a road trip a couple years ago in Des Moines, and I remember that one in particular. It was really wonderful. So yeah, excited to dig in. You touched on something that I started to cultivate, I think like 10 years ago, which is unstructured time. And growing up as a kid, I was involved in a ton of extracurriculars and I was always busy, very type A. And, I think like a lot of us, we discover that that's kind of stressful. And so over the last 10 years or so, most of my adult life, I've found lots of time for unstructured stuff, walks, yoga, art, talking with friends, and that keeps me sane for sure.
Well, I love that you said that, Jack, because this whole year, 2025, for me has been about play and about play dates and enrichment or idea days and bringing on guests who use play and slowing down and rest to fuel them in their ambition. And it makes so much sense that you're saying that. Another guest that's proving my point. I love this.
Yeah, I think someone was, it wasn't a real stat, but they were like, if you were just like 20% less sort of like charging forward or less like always on the main thing, your mind would open up to, more creativity and all the divergent things that sort of enrich creativity and problem solving. And so I have a pretty full life, like Tuesday night dinner and hanging out with friends and stuff, but it's taken a really long time and I'm also pretty privileged, but I have hours every day to sort of do what I want, whether that's walk or journal or cook. And across all of those, my subconscious is working on whatever I'm thinking about. And I've had some really wonderful insights, both about my person and also, the products that I built from that. And it's a tough thing, like building a muscle of listening to yourself or your inner voice or your subconscious, or, you could bring in spiritual words like the Tao. It takes time to build a muscle to learn how to listen to that. But as you begin to, and some people, I guess, also would call that self-trust, like there's so much insight sitting in that. And we live in like a culture and an environment that's very much like push, push, push. And there's certainly times and places for that, but it's not every day.
And as you're talking, something I love is seeing the fruits of somebody's life and being like, yeah, that makes sense. I can see that what you are talking about exists in your life. And as you were talking about creating a life that gives you hours a day to do whatever, to be unproductive, to let your subconscious mind be working, I've definitely seen you stressed like once or twice, but it's not near the level of like wound up stress a lot of people experience. I feel like you are so like even keel and like you always have this kind of light presence about you. And I know how long have you been working on Grapple now?
Typically VC-backed startups, right? They have a very fast inception. And so people are typically like 3 months, but I actually had the idea 2.5 years ago. And I kind of avoided it for a while because I was like, I don't know if the world needs another data tool. And then I started coding it in earnest like 1.5 years ago and quit my job last September. So it's been sort of, I think what the cool kids these days say, like, let him cook or whatever. And like, I definitely let that idea cook for a while. And part of it was that, I wanted the idea to come out sort of naturally and go wherever it wanted. And so I spent about a year, like, just having fun building, which is the opposite of my day job. As a product manager, I'm very like, what are the business objectives we're driving? Like, who are we building this for? Very like convergent. But creating that empty space helped me explore building a product that is kind of novel. And I'm sure we'll dig more into in a second, but setting off on my own for Grapple, this 2.5 year journey sort of feels like a season finale of like all these personal ecosystem of practices I built over the last 10 years in more ways than one.
And I ask that because I feel like the last 6 months, there's been so much movement And I've definitely been able to witness some of that and see you in these moments of like having a big demo or talking to a new client or getting a co-founder. And there is this kind of excitement and this energy, but it doesn't feel super stressed or super pressured in the way that feels negative. And I think a lot of times that's something that I get wrapped in is I'm like, how do I get myself out of like running 3 companies? And I'm like so excited. And then the excited energy turns into like nervous, pressured energy. And so I just appreciate that about you. But what you said of like letting it sit is something that I also wanted to talk about because you mentioned this during a presentation I saw you do a few weeks ago at 1 Million Cups. And you did talk about how you had an idea and you said, does the world actually need this? Is this another thing that already exists, or is it something that is needed? And the fact that you actually think that and let it sit and find its way and find its kind of place in the world and let that answer, yeah, it is needed, come up. To me, I really admire and respect because I've had so many business ideas where I'm like, I don't want to produce more stuff in the world and more noise and more of something that already exists just to do it. And so how did that kind of process and journey look for you as you were kind of sitting on it and letting it kind of process subconsciously and consciously, and then finally kind of saying, okay, wait, yeah, there's something here that the world needs?
Yeah, 2 parts to my response. And one actually ties back to something we were talking about a second ago, which is that we typically engineer a lot of stress in our lives.
Guilty.
We sort of become, I don't want to say addicted, but we become sort of hooked on our own supply of like the types of stress that we're comfortable with. And it's easy to just continue sort of living in that stress. And, maybe it's that you're working a 60-hour week, or maybe it's that you're constantly behind on house projects or maintenance of the home, or you'd like to like work out more, be more active, and you're always beating up on yourself and creating stress that you're not. All of those have been stressors in my life. I think part of the personal work that precedes like diving in and having an idea and bringing it to the world is understanding where you're investing your energy. And we invest a ton of energy in stress, and stress just sort of is like, if our energy is a budget, it's an earmark that keeps getting bigger over time with really terrible compounding interest in the way you don't want. And so it takes a lot of sort of, I think, difficult inner work to understand the stories that go into like, why am I creating this stress, or why am I addicted to feeling this way, or things like that. And so I think like having a practice where you're trying to understand sort of the default way that you operate and notice it. Like I talked about building up mental muscles, like that's another one. And I think, that work can take a really long time, but from it will create free open space for unstructured time where you can be creative. There's in tech, a lot of talk about, this is the second part of my response, which is in tech, we talk a lot about first principles or building a product that like, if you build a product from first principles and you revisit those first principles, that you'll generally build a product that resonates with you and resonates with your market instead of straying from sort of your original mission. And I tried to think a really long time about first principles for Grapple. And there's obviously downs to this. You can't sort of navel gaze forever. Like eventually you have to start building something and you can't think of everything ahead of time. But the first principle that I kept coming back to with Grapple was most data tools and data products are built for highly technical people, like data scientists and data engineers and data teams. And that's because we sort of have this assumption that they're sort of the tip of the spear for a company's data strategy. Even if that data and that data technology ends up filtering down to like a director of marketing or head of sales or something like that, that the data team is sort of on the front end of that. And what that means is that the sales and marketing folks or non-technical folks are beholden to that data team. And I think for certain things, that's really good. Like data scientists can go find insights and pull stats, like and actually do statistical modeling that's really powerful. But what I've experienced is that people typically just want to like easily pull sales pipeline for last quarter by country. So you have this sort of like giant machinery to do something simple, or like a hammer sees everything as a nail. And this idea of like, what if we built a data tool that didn't require technical people to operate is one of Grapple's core principles. And downstream of that, there's a ton of different decisions you make when you're building a data platform. And so I think as you have an idea, as ideas come to you because you're creating more space in your life by trying to manage and reduce stress and cultivate your creativity, you will be able to reason about these first principles and use those to sort of guide the product and the business and not stray too far from what originally interested you. And that helps you build enduring passion that will sort of sustain you as you go through it. Because something that's really hard about startups, and I'm sure you know this about starting anything, is that like there are times when you need endurance and there are times when you're coasting. And the coasting is when things are going well, and the endurance is when you haven't quite figured it out yet. And you can return to those first principles for a pretty long time to sustain you. And so like the stories I hear from non-technical folks, again, in sales and marketing and creative and elsewhere, where they've had to build dashboards or had to work with data, and they just felt the soul crushing weight of having to wait for someone else else or try and figure out themselves, or they're not proud, or they don't believe in the data numbers that they're presenting, like helping them is really motivating.
Well, and I've demoed Grapple and got one of my companies in there. And it's like, okay, if I want to know my numbers, I have so many different spreadsheets. And especially as a small business or a service-based business, it's like, okay, I'm going to track like how many leads did I come in and how many of those people did I book? And like, there's only a few metrics I can be manually tracking. And yeah, I could pull it all into a system before Grapple and be like, okay, let me pull it into a system and some data thing will tell me something. And I don't know the first place to start, or it just seems so overwhelming. It's like, put it in Notion, put it in Airtable. And I'm like, I still don't know how to like do something after that. And so I do love that what you're doing is, okay, how do we make it as easy as possible for someone to see the numbers they want to see and not have to spend hours and hours of time on the middle ground of getting it uploaded. It was super easy to upload into Grapple, connecting it, through a API, right? It's super easy. And then just typing in, okay, this is what I want to see. This is the time frame, and not having to build it yourself and be like, okay, like you said, is this even correct? Am I even like doing this right? Because I'm trying to run a data science thing myself. I know enough, but I don't know enough to feel confident that what I'm actually producing is always accurate.
Totally. Someone after 1 million cups, which we were at a couple weeks ago, came up to me and asked me a question. They were like, so did Grapple replace data engineering and or data science? And I didn't have a great answer then because I hadn't fully thought through sort of that spectrum. But Grapple, for a huge subset of what businesses need to report on, replaces data engineering. One of the things we've invented is universal data library, and it's responsible for automatically syncing all of your data together from all your different apps. You can use CSVs or just connect directly to say HubSpot or Salesforce. But then it also does one of the most time consuming things of working with data is having your data team model the data, meaning like normalize dates so that dates are formatted correctly, or convert like numbers to actual numbers. There's all these computer science things around like what is a floating point integer and versus a decimal and like a Boolean and all these things. And like people don't want to think about those things, but when you're working with data, you have to normalize it and model them in a way so that computers can actually work with all that data. And so we're imagining a product where like all the power's under the hood and you don't even realize it's there, but it unlocks for you becoming a data scientist yourself. And so a core thesis to Grapple is that way more people can work with data and can reason about data than know how to use all the technical tools you need to be able to work with data. So I'm sure you can think about what metadata from a CRM you'd like to analyze and slice and dice a report by. And I'm sure you can think about math and you can think about categories and bar charts versus stacked area charts. I'm sure you can think about all those things, but there aren't a lot of tools that just let you do that. You have to like spend most of your energy, 80% or more of your energy, like about all this stuff before that. And so peers, or what we aspire to be peers of, are like Figma and Notion and Airtable, where like before Notion and Airtable, you like spun off Microsoft Access or paid a developer to spin up a SQL database. And it was like so cumbersome to just do a simple like structured data set. And now it's a breeze and anyone can sort of click around in the UI. And there's still some technical thought behind it, right? You're thinking about columns and you're thinking about what types are these columns. But I think a lot of people, especially those that grew up with the internet, can do that. But we just haven't like reinvented the data stack. And so I mentioned first principles earlier, but Grapple's first principle of unlocking data access for non-technical folks, but in a fully realized way, sounds really simple, but is radical. When I like pitch to VCs or folks who like aren't in the data like yourself, they're like, oh, that sounds like kind of easy and simple. Like I don't fully get it, but it's actually really hard. And like you traditionally need, and I'm going to list a whole bunch of technologies that most people probably don't know, like a data warehouse and an ETL and a modeling layer and potentially an orchestration layer. And then on top of all of that, the actual visualization layer. You just need so many tools. And one of my friends, Matt Hoover, shared an article with me that I reshared on LinkedIn yesterday. And it was like the modern data stack is a dumpster fire. And it is because like a company of even 500 employees has like a dozen different data tools and they're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars a year on data stuff. And like a lot of that tooling is pretty good for like the technical data team, but it's basically unusable by anyone else. And so the trend I think we're going to see is that data tools niche down into either being highly technical for like data scientists and data engineers, or like more do it yourself or no code in the form of Grapple. And there's a ton of activity kind of in the market right now in the AI plus data space. And I'm happy to dig more into that in a second, but we're just really focused on unlocking sort of this core experience that someone like you or me before I learned the technical stuff can dive into the data.
And it's such a time saver too, because either of the kind of paths you just mentioned of being for somebody who's highly technical or being, build it in a no code way, I still have to build the thing. I still have to like get my data from, the like point A to the visual that actually makes sense for me or for me to show a team. And I know, like you're saying, I know what the data is that I want to be seeing. I don't know how to get it there other than like literally manually looking through 100 records and being like, do I see a pattern? And it stops business owners. And I work so much with solopreneurs, small companies, online, like course creators, educators. And so I'm always thinking from this small business perspective, we just don't do it then. We just don't have data that we actually know what's going on in our business, know what's moving the needle. And that's really the thing I'm so big on right now is optimizing, but in the way that we're talking about of taking a step back and doing less and making sure what we are doing is moving the needle. And it's hard when you don't know what is moving the needle in your business and you have such a small amount of data or numbers or results to go based off of. And you're like, well, that's literally, I'm not going to spend 20 hours figuring out how to find more answers in this. So I'm just going to go based on what I know. And Grapple is unlocking that level of like, there's so many hidden nuggets you could find. Like you said, is there a certain subset of customer that's actually making more money and bringing more revenue in and making it so we can actually chase these down and be like, okay, well, let's just ask questions and see different things instead of spending 10 hours building a thing to see a thing.
100%. And I think that my hunch is that most data requests go unfulfilled. Like people just sort of throw their hands up in the air and they're like, okay, I need a report on how many users signed up this month, but like, are they still using the product? Like, I'll just skip over that. One, because I might feel guilty that they're not, but also because I probably can't do a cohort retention analysis of my user signups because no one knows what a cohort retention analysis is, and let alone build one and pull one together. So something that I found really surprising as I started to dig into kind of like the market dynamics of this space, only 26% of companies worldwide use business intelligence software. And for mid-market companies, so like those with like 100 to 1,000 employees, that's 22%. And so outside of like the Fortune 100 or Global 2000, like business intelligence software, which is sort of the market category that Grapple's in, like largely hasn't penetrated or driven adoption. Like I think CRM adoption is like 80 or 90% of businesses. Like it's just some crazy high number. And BI just hasn't broken through. And we are of the opinion that the form factor hasn't been figured out yet. Like the reason that BI hasn't penetrated through to everyone is that it's just been so hard to use. Like business intelligence isn't really its own market. It's business intelligence plus like these 10 other tools that I talked about. And so if you think about what Canva did, like Canva invented a billion graphic designers or something like that. Like so many people that would have never raised their hand as a graphic designer, like signed up for Canva and tried an invitation template for their 5-year-old's birthday. And then all of a sudden they were like moving pixels on a screen. And like the corollary there is that like people can think about graphic design, but they don't know how to use Adobe Illustrator or Photoshop. And similar to Grapple, like we think people can think about data, but they just haven't been able to use the tools. And something that's distinct about Grapple, there's a lot of AI data products out there, but with Grapple, we have a really nice balance of AI magic, but with like a traditional UI that you can like understand and audit. And so there's a lot of AI data products out there that will be like, describe what you want to see, and it will like generate a SQL query. But to know if the data is right, you'd have to like read that SQL query. And if you're non-technical, you don't know how to read that. And so what's unique about Grapple is we've injected AI in a few specific places, and you can always see the underlying data that's being rolled up into aggregations or into data visualizations. And we think that's kind of the breakthrough user experience. Like at some point, we'll probably have a chatbot for specific use cases, but figuring out this balance of AI that helps you move faster, but still an interface that gives you control. So like you said, like I know the data I want, just input that and then layer a model on top of it. And so that's what we're doing. And that right now, at least is still pretty distinct compared to our competitors.
Well, and I appreciate what you're saying in a way that I don't think a lot of people necessarily do. And so I'm going to give another kind of thought or example on this. One of my clients, Contemporary Analysis, they had their first highly technical conference for highly technical people in May. And their chief AI engineer was talking about this. He had a presentation that was called something about like, don't build an AI agent, build this instead. And so often people are like, oh, great, AI agent. It's going to be another, basically a human brain that's in a computer that is able to think through everything the way that I would and complete multiple tasks at once. And it's like, but actually an AI agent is probably rethinking the same task from scratch every single time and starting from ground zero and not duplicating what has worked in the past. Whereas a workflow, what you're saying, we've built the structure, we've built the pathway, and we've input AI into these steps individually so that it's doing one operation, but it's not having to think through the whole process itself. And so what you're saying, I'm like, I see a little bit of where a lot of people go wrong with AI and where it's been amazing to see so many people. It's like Canva. Now AI is letting so many people become software engineers of sorts and developers and do so much more. But there's kind of this misunderstanding of what it's able to do right now. And I love how you're really strategically using it, but not relying on it to do the thing for you.
100%. And, there's a lot of data tools out there. There's a lot of AI data tools out there. And I think the way that we use AI is distinct and good. But also a lot of these tools, like, they make a lot of assumptions that one, like you're just going to keep uploading CSVs to a chat interface, but like that CSV is out of date the minute you export it, or they connect like to your existing data warehouse, but like data warehouses fall out of date. You still have to hire an expensive data team to maintain them or be technical enough to configure one yourself. And so compared to all of our competitors, we've seen most of them as not a complete solution. And if you think about like, we're sort of targeting companies with under 1,000 employees, like they need a complete solution, either because their data team is so busy or they don't have one. And so going back to first principles, like we've thought through what is absolutely every single thing that someone would need to be able to do this data analysis. And it's a lot of stuff. And so Grapple vertically integrates some massive technologies into one. And, like that's cool. And we can like boast our chests for being very like big technologists, but that's really just after unlocking a really magical user experience that you can just get started right away and you can just start working with it without setting up a ton of stuff, spending a ton of money, hiring or learning a ton of stuff. And we're in the early innings of this transformation. I think in 5 to 10 years, we'll see that like, of course, this is the way you would build a data tool, like for a non-technical audience. And I think VCs are nervous when you create a new category because you have to do all the market education of like saying like, hey, no code data tools like are a thing and companies should spend money on them. And that's a difficult task for like a Grapple marketing team or similar to do, but we're going to undertake it because the product's so magical. And I think in 5 to 10 years, it'll just be a no-brainer that there's a class of data tools that work this way.
With that being said, if you are listening and at all interested, do a demo with Jack and Grapple. I want to take us a little bit more on the founder's journey side of things, because a lot of time, and you were already mentioning this, when you go VC and you get funding and now there's an investor, there's this added level of pressure and speed and move so fast. And you're somebody who is like, I'm going to have hours of unstructured time in my days. And so the journey of thinking through this idea while you had a full-time job and then deciding to quit your full-time job and now continuing to balance building something from scratch and making, like you were saying, your own literal piece of the market and still taking care of yourself, making sure you have what you need personally to keep going. How do you do it?
So over 10 years ago, I was working with someone and I had this vision of a version of life that like where weekends weren't a thing. And that didn't mean like that I was working 7 days a week, but I had this sort of like vision of like working a little every day, but enjoying it so much that it didn't feel like this slog between like Monday through Friday and the weekends, and that it would sort of even out. And maybe I'd even lose track of like what day of the week it was. And I would just be so much in flow that I would be living this life. And I sort of pinched myself and realized like a year ago that I was now in this. And there's a couple of ways to build a successful technology company, or probably any company in general. You can go what I call sort of a viral route, where you raise like an enormous amount of money at a high valuation and from like the big name VCs, and you grow a ton. And sometimes you're in a market or building a product where that is the right move. But I think more often than not, it just sort of becomes like a rat race. And that is really stressful because, incentives drive everything. And so you have to think about like that VC that's giving you a ton of money at a valuation wants to mark that up on like the subsequent funding round. And so you're going to have to run that business in a way that's going to like generate that return or go raise even more money. And a lot of startups and companies just get out over their skis and like their valuation multiple never comes back down to earth and the revenue doesn't catch up with it. And that's a difficult place to be in. And I think that's partially why there's the sentiment in venture capital that for every, they're going to invest in 100 companies and one of them will be a standout success. And then kind of on the flip side of that, we have like, okay, I'm going to build a lifestyle business and like revenue's not going to grow 30% year over year, but it's going to grow sort of well, or maybe it does grow really quickly in the beginning and then it plateaus because it's just me and a friend or something like that. And that's a totally fine and great business. And honestly, like Grapple's somewhere in between a VC backed and a lifestyle business. What we're trying to do is build something that's really great that my co-founder and I, Andrew, love to work on, where we're excited to show up every day. We don't feel the crush of a manager or not being inspired by the vision and mission. And I think that balance in between of like hyper growth and no growth or stalling out is a difficult place to be in. But you have to think about sort of your own first principles. Maybe you want that wild ride of raising a ton of money, or maybe you just want to go do it, even realizing that maybe it's the second or third idea or company that ultimately succeeds. But I think getting really clear about like sort of what you want from this is really important. And then like I started to realize 2 years ago that I think Grapple's kind of legit. And so I started preparing my life 2 years ago to like get ready to quit my job and do this. And again, as you sort of pay down your stress debt that I talked about earlier, you can start to make decisions in life, whether that's lowering expenses or saving money or getting a different job to maybe make a little more to get ready, or there's so many options that'll set you up well for when you make the move. Because I think a lot of times, at least creatives like us, we walk around with this guilt. I should be doing more with my life, or I should be living my like Elizabeth Gilbert, eat, pray, love life. And I should just like flip the switch and make it happen. And I think for me, it took like 10 years of little adjustments and paying down stress in my life and sort of figuring that out. And it's not easy. And I think we latch onto stories, which might be the viral VC one, or a story that like I can't be successful, or it just is me and I can't reach out to help from others, or I can't build a team or something. And we get stuck in either of these sort of holes. And there's definitely a middle way. There's definitely a way to sort of like put the pieces together in a way that's sustainable for you. So for me, like my routine, I go for a walk every morning, usually 30-ish minutes to a coffee shop. I work for a few hours and then walk back. And in that 4-hour window, I do like almost all of the work that I actually need to get done for the day. And then I have some meetings, and then I log off kind of early in the afternoon and go work out again and exercise or do something. And maybe I'll come back and work a little bit around 6 or 7, but I definitely don't work late into the night. I'm definitely an early riser, and I work a little on the weekends. And so I think it's just sort of putting all these little pieces together. And there's so many frameworks and approaches for like thinking about how to construct a life you're obsessed with or your dream life. And I don't have a particular flavor of that I really love, other than I guess I really like walks. You know, I typically walk like 6 to 8 miles a day, and it's less about the distance and more about the time. Just, I think it's in The Artist's Way that she recommends, like you go for an aimless walk that's several hours long once a week, and just bringing more of that time into your life is really good. And then just realizing that it's going to take time to like pay down the stress debt and also figure out who you are and what motivates you and what doesn't. And I think a huge piece of that is like building the self-trust to understand which stories actually resonate with you and which stories you think should resonate with you. That was something that I struggled with for a while. Like growing up as a kid, people were like, oh, you're the next Steve Jobs or next Bill Gates. And there's like all this pressure applied to like be really big and be the one. And I realized pretty early in adulthood, I like working with technology, but I want to have friends and be a reasonable human that's nice to people. You know, I think that both of them outgrew that at a certain age.
You're like, but I can just outgrow that sooner or never grow into it because I'm so hyper stressed, and then I don't have to grow out of it.
Totally. Yeah. My rock bottom was like January of 2016. And it was just that I was like drinking 8 shots of espresso a day, and I wasn't sleeping well. And, you know, I like woke up every morning with a terrible upset stomach, and like, you know, my mental and physical health was just pretty struggling. And I was running an agency at the time that was like doing fine. Like it was helping pay the bills, but it wasn't, you know, standout success. And I very much had a view of success that it was going to be like push, 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 go, go, go. Don't take your foot off the gas. And then I started to soften just a little. And then I realized, oh, this is great. And I can still be really productive, and I can still be really creative and connect with people and work with people I enjoy and stuff that I enjoy. And that softening just took a long time. And there's some saying, I'm going to totally butcher this, but like the best time to plant a tree was yesterday or today or tomorrow or something. And like, you know, whatever age you're at, like you might think like, oh, I'm too old or I'm too young or that's so much time, but all we've got is time. And so you might as well make the most of it. And I can go on and deeper into this, but we usually think life is just a series of big goals that we accomplish and like check off, and those are the blissful moments. But actually this morning when I was walking back to my desk to get ready for this, I saw some purple flowers, and it was underneath a really nice tree, and like just sort of the scene composed. And I was like, I'm so grateful that I got to experience this little moment of bliss this morning. And it was something rather innocuous, just nature. And so having moments like that sort of make the seldom major payoff in my professional life, because it is, you work so hard for weeks or months or years and then finally get the payoff, makes that balance like a little bit more sustainable.
I love that you're talking about time. So we're recording this episode, and 2 weeks before we recorded it, I think it was episode 67, 68. It was a solo episode that I literally said the timeline doesn't exist. And you probably have 2 thoughts on time that are holding you back. One is that you don't have enough of it. And one is that you're in the wrong spot on your timeline. It's like, oh, like you said, I'm too old, I'm too young, I don't have enough time to do that. And Yeah, if you tell yourself that, sure, but you could choose not to hold on to that story. And if you want to go listen to that, go listen to that, guys. But I relate so much to what you're saying. And I, on this podcast, so often talk about how do we build a great life while we do the thing? How do we take care of ourselves while we're ambitious? Because I've seen so many people get wrapped up in hustle culture and burnout, or even working a 9 to 5 that they complain about every single day and never do anything about it for decades. But lately, even though I'm running 3 companies and just launched a new thing called Omaha Loud, which is Omaha's podcast network. I'll send you the details, because if you want to be a guest on local podcasts, that's kind of like what this thing is going to build into. I still find myself being like, oh, am I now leaning too much into like rest and play and not pushing hard enough to grow fast enough? And yesterday I literally had 4 meetings and got 10 things checked off a to-do list. And I'm still, wait a minute, I am having unstructured hours in my day. I got to watch baseball. It's the CWS. I got to watch baseball yesterday. And I find myself questioning if I've gone too far in the other direction. And saying it out loud, I'm like, girl, you are doing the most. Like, there's no way that you've gone too far in the other direction. But even adjusting a little bit, for me, it's starting to feel like I'm not getting enough done. I'm not moving fast enough. And I'm curious, you've been on this journey for 10 years. I'll say I'm in year like 3 or 4, even though it's probably year 29, because I've never kind of not thought this way. But what was the beginning like for you? And what is it like now? And how do you stay aligned with what you're needing day by day?
So I think everyone needs to find, especially as you start building, I don't want to say momentum, because momentum triggers like the striving productivity part of our brain, but another way to say momentum would be like trust. As you start to build trust with yourself that you're on this path, early on, you're going to need an activity that recenters you. And you're probably going to end up having multiple, but in the beginning, finding that first one is really important. And so for me, I stumbled into, almost literally, pun intended, I guess, walking. And I remember I was on a phone call with my mom in Uptown in Minneapolis, walking from one coffee shop to another. I was really stressed. And I called her on the phone, and we ended up talking for like an hour or more or something like that on the phone. And I remember it was like in between Hennepin and Lindale. I remember the day so much. And I realized, oh, I kind of like this idea of walking. So walking for me became the regular practice that helped me return to myself. And it could be gardening, it could be journaling or art or whatever, but it's an activity where you disappear into. And there's a lot of people that write scientifically and spiritually about flow state, but the thing that's most convincing to me is like flow state is when you lose your sense of self and disappear, and that's actually where you are the most yourself. Finding that first thing that helps sort of sustain you is really huge, and so much is downstream of finding that one thing. And it can be hard to take the leap to experiment. The other thing is, like I'm saying, you might find this one practice that is really meaningful to you and really great. And so that might build up in your head, like, oh my God, I need to find this thing and it's going to be a big thing in my life. I'm like, OMG, and just try and breathe through like that anticipation. But if you like it enough, the anticipation will just melt away on its own. And it might take you some time to figure out what that thing is, but eventually you'll find it and it'll sustain you down this path. But yeah, just finding that one practice, I think, is really huge early on.
Another thing is puzzles. Like, I've been thinking of this concept a lot more, not as necessarily finding the one thing, but just doing more things you're bad at instead of try new things. Cause it's like, there's so much pressure and will I be good? I specifically say, do things you're bad at, takes the pressure away. And now you've succeeded because you're bad. Like, it's a little mind trick.
I'm so bad at, like, my dad has gotten really into oil pastels and has been a VP of sales his whole life, but not artsy career traditionally. And he started out kind of bad and he's a lot better now, and still not Van Gogh or whatever, but really good in terms of a practice for him. And he just sort of stumbled with that. Visual art, especially representational art. You want me to write a poem? Great. If you want me to like depict a mountainside or like hillside with pastels or something, like my head just explodes. And I was just up on Lake Superior last week and I was like, okay, I'm going to take a deep breath and we're just going to try this. And sitting in that was really good for me. So you touched on, am I doing enough? And I totally have struggled with that as well. And even now, I've softened a lot, and that's still sometimes a story that will play out in my head. The way that I've sort of started to break that down is into 2 categories. One category is sometimes, yes, we just are working too much and we just need to work less. And that is for everyone's personality. It might be 5% of the time or 80% of the time. You don't know how often you overwork yourself. as you build an understanding of yourself and start to trust yourself and trust your intuition, you'll start to build a sense for that. And that just takes, experimentation. But the second category, and I especially noticed this the last few years as I've been working on Grapple, and, I've been working on side projects trying to build a venture scale startup for 5 years or so. Am I working on the right things? And this kind of goes back to like the stress thing, but it's really easy to work on the wrong things and then be stressed because you didn't get the big things done. And so that's the other thing to look at, is like, maybe you do need to take your foot off the gas, but when you do put your foot on the gas, like work on the right things so that you can really relax. And it's usually like tasks or projects that we're scared of or we're bad at or we're trying to avoid or things like that. I think in like the dopamine fueled infinite scroll world of today, like getting through, I guess the technical term is executive dysfunction, like getting through that so you can like orient yourself on tasks that you're bad at or are difficult when the dopamine hit isn't 5 seconds later, I think is one of the biggest superpowers you can cultivate. And they don't really have a good answer for how to get over it. Journaling about why you're scared of the problem, trying to do it for 5 minutes, like there's procrastination, I guess, is sort of the broad category. But just, I think there are those two distinct categories. If sometimes I do need to take my foot off the gas and relax, but sometimes I need to also reorient the work I'm doing and do the most important pressing things that I have to deliver on. I know I lived in sort of this hamster wheel of, I worked hard, but not necessarily fully on the things I needed to. And so now I'm like behind, but I need to take time, and it's a difficult ball to unwind. So just start at the beginning and don't do it. It's that easy. I'm joking, of course, that's sarcasm.
Well, and this is like, for me, something that just over the weekend, I started to be like, oh my gosh, I'm starting to feel overwhelmed. Like, what is even happening? And I knew in my brain that I didn't need to be working and that I had a handle on everything. But in my body, I felt like I was dropping a ton of balls. And partially because one of my clients, we just signed on 6-month contract with a team of developers. Jack, I was telling you about this. And my client slash now business partner, co-founder, is out for a month. And she needs to be out. And I am not going to message her about work at all, because it's not that, like, there's no emergencies. It's not that urgent, but just that feeling of, I need to make sure all of this is running well and better than she could hope when she gets back. And so really what I did Sunday night, before it was even Monday, I was like, I know I'm not going to be able to sleep. I've been trying to think about work the last few nights going to sleep, or trying not to, but it's been happening. And so I write down the name of every single client or business. And so right now there was like 6 just titles, every single business, every client, the podcast being one of them. And I brain dump every single thing that I can think of that needs to get done this week. And then some stuff that's like, okay, that could be for next week. And I took my little colored markers and I highlighted what needs to happen on Monday and what needs to happen Tuesday and Wednesday. And this is something that if I would just do it more often, I think I would actually be in a lot better mindset. But I only do it when I'm like, oh my gosh, I've got to do something, guys. I'm going to lose it. And so yesterday I was like, okay, I try not to have more than 6 tasks on my list on any given day. And yesterday there was 4 calls and 14 tasks, and I got 10 of them done. And I was exhausted at the end of the day, went on a walk, tried to watch the CWS. And yeah, I was like, okay, these last 4 things, they're not going to get done. But they're the things that if I got to them, heck yes, that would have been amazing, but they were not my top priority. And I knew I got my top priorities done for the day, and I could rest. And I could be like, okay, we had a huge push day today. We knew it was going to happen. We prepped for it, and that's it. But another thing I'll do more often when I am not doing things that move the needle is I either give myself 1 task for the day or a to-do list of 6 things. And if I'm not doing the priority thing and I'm nervous and scared about it, I literally will tell myself this is the only thing I'm doing today, like nothing else. And it works sometimes. There's always something else that sneaks in.
That morning time that I mentioned, where I walk to a little coffee shop and work for a couple hours and come back, I sort of disappear from the world. I don't take meetings or like anything like that. Sometimes I journal the whole time. I often do work on my laptop though. And if there's something that I'm really scared of, I do it then. And I do it on a small screen in the corner of the coffee shop. I sort of just get the setting right to be vulnerable and have sort of, I go to a coffee shop where I know lots of people. And so I feel the warm embrace just of being around people I know and love. And so I love that you invented your own productivity system. And I think that, again, so often we tell ourselves like, oh, I have to be into, I forget what it's called, power journaling or like Pomodoro, or I love Ugmont's analog system. But any of these, if you're hard on yourself, can become a trap of like being hard on yourself for not doing them to a T. And so you kind of have to find and experiment with what works for you. And something that I thought about, because your story resonates so much with things that I've been through, is it sounds so hippie, but like we also have to love ourselves. And such a magical ingredient to being able to push sometimes when we need to, and being able to relax when we don't, and finding creativity is just loving who we already are today. And I think one of like executive dysfunction or like getting through difficult tasks, but then also loving ourselves come hell or high water. Those are two of the most difficult things, I think, in modern existence, like in terms of emotional labor, because it's just so easy to be like, oh, I didn't get everything done. And, you know, you might have your own inner story, like I'm a bad person or I'm a piece of shit or whatever, but your friends still love you. The people in your life, sure, maybe you didn't deliver one task and so one person's annoyed with you, but everyone else is still on your team. And so I meditate and I'm pretty woo-woo. And so, you know, in times of distress, I just sort of send love to my heart and that helps me center. But I still like pushing. And today, for example, I have 3 meetings and all of them, including this one, are very high energy. Like I got to be on meetings and then I'm hosting dinner tonight for Tuesday night dinner. And so it's a really full day and I know that I'm not going to get a lot done. And thankfully yesterday I did. And so I'm just going to kind of take it as it comes and not be too hard on myself. And, you know, I think we develop these ways of viewing ourselves and what we have to do or that we're not meeting expectations or things like that. And all of that's programming that we picked up somewhere in life. And maybe it's because someone taught it to us or because they made us feel that way. And I think part of that centering practice that I mentioned over the last 10 years of the walks and everything, you need to like build a muscle in your brain to notice when those stories arise and then just love that they're arising even, and then love when they pass, and noticing when they boot up sort of like a computer is half the battle, because they'll initialize and they'll influence how we're thinking without us even realizing it. And then we'll go on a 3-hour tumbling down the rabbit hole of, you know, self-loathing or just being really stressed. And catching that early can be really nice.
And letting yourself, like you said, loving yourself through it instead of shutting yourself through it. And it's like, if you're starting to spiral because you're not getting the work done, maybe the best thing you can do is not force getting the work done and go on the walk or do the painting or, you know, work on a 2,000 piece puzzle. Whew, that'll take you out of it.
And simultaneously, like sometimes you do need to summon courage to like go work on something you're scared of or that you've been putting off, or send a difficult email or whatever. And, you know, all these frameworks and systems for becoming a better person or living a life you're obsessed with, you can't just be like, I want these 2 or those. You kind of have to experiment with them, and sort of like a Plinko board, like you don't know where it's going to like land, what works for you. But the main thing you're building as you experiment with all of these is an understanding of self, or self-trust, that you will learn how to select for frameworks and things that work well for you. And it's ultimately, I think, that muscle of attuning yourself to like what really works for you. You mentioned like your mind being disconnected from your body. And I think walking for me helped sort of bring those together, and like being fully embodied and not just a head or just a body, I think is a helpful sort of step down understanding yourself.
Well, I know you're obsessed with walks, but what else are you obsessed with when it comes to, you know, maybe disconnecting or reconnecting with yourself?
Yeah. So you mentioned walks. I can't use that one. Can I use hikes? No, I'm just kidding. I really like walking. I in particular like walking from my house. Like if I have to drive somewhere, even though I love walking, like just the process of being in the car like pulls me out of whatever benefit the walk is going to provide. But if it doesn't bother you, then, you know, drive to a hillside or a forest that is pleasing for you. I really like journaling. And over the years, my writing started as journaling and sort of morphed more towards sometimes poems, sometimes stream of conscious rambling. Sometimes I'll let myself write in words that don't fully form sentences. And that's been really helpful. I have a drafting table off to the left here that I got on Facebook Marketplace for $20, and it has crayons and coloring pencils and like all sorts of silly stuff. So I'll do that. I have been really trying to get back into reading recently, and I actually realized I cannot read nonfiction. I spend so much time during the day reading Substack and emails and like everything that like I just want to read something that's like fun and silly and humanizing. And so lately, this is very pointed, but I've been reading the Silo series by Hugh Howey, or the Apple TV Plus show Silo.
I was going to say, did you watch it first?
Yes, I watched it first and I loved it. I needed something after Severance because I was like, I'm bored now that Severance
I did the
is
same
over.
thing.
Did you watch Silo after Severance?
Oh, yeah. I watched it after season 1 of Severance, and I haven't watched
Same.
season 2 of Severance yet.
Oh, okay. I watched it all this spring. I like caught up on season one and then season two started and it was great. I really liked Silo a lot and I've always been obsessed with tunnels. Like this is so random, but like as a kid, one of my favorite book series was Tunnels. I forget who the author is. And these boys like went in the earth and discovered subterranean civilization. And I just thought that was so cool. And so I liked Silo and I've never watched a TV show and then gone and read the book. I actually historically haven't watched a ton of TV or read a lot of books, LOL. And so the fact that I watched a TV show and then I'm now reading the books is crazy. And last week when I was up on the North Shore relaxing at a cabin with my grandparents, I read 300 pages, which is the most I've ever read in 1 week in my adult life. And I highly recommend the books. I think the books are better than the TV show. In fact, the writing is a bit richer than the dialogue.
And the show is so good. I loved the show because I have this need to complete stuff. So if I pick up a book, like a nonfiction book, I legitimately can't do anything until it's over. It's also why I haven't started season 2 of Severance, because I will watch it all in one day. And if I don't, all I will think about is the storyline and the characters. So as soon as I finished Silo, or however many seasons were out, I think it's just 2 seasons are out of Silo.
Correct, yeah.
I immediately went down the rabbit hole of, okay, what happened in the book? What was different? What are the next 2 seasons going to be? And I think they did a deal for the next 2 seasons that'll finish off the trilogy of books. So I haven't read the books yet, partially because if I pick it up, I need to pick it up when I have 12 hours.
Totally.
Okay, I want to know, you have lived in Minnesota, you're living in Omaha, Nebraska, you've been here a few years. What are you obsessed with? What's your take on Omaha?
Okay, plug. If you go to jacksellwood.com, you can read some of my writing. I write these like year in reviews. I actually haven't written one yet for last year, which is crazy. I actually wrote it in December. I was like, I'm ahead of schedule, and then I actually hasn't come back to me to wrap up yet. But for 2023, I wrote one, and I talked a lot about Omaha. So I'm going to give you a meta point that's sort of abstract, and then I'll give you some concrete ones. Omaha is like a liminal space. It would be like living in a city if the whole city was a liminal space. And liminal spaces are sort of like a very Gen Z thing right now. On TikTok and Instagram, it'll be like a photo of a liminal space, just like a mezzanine level in some conference center that is weird and has strange lighting and plants. But
wait, I need you to explain more, because even though I'm Gen Z-ish, I'm not on TikTok and I've never heard this term.
Okay. So a liminal space, how I understand it is, it's kind of a space that exists, but the reason it exists or the reason it exists the way it exists is unclear. It could be like a closet that looks like a hallway, but like doesn't go anywhere, or like a wing in a big building that goes to nowhere, or just some sort of place where it's like, it's really big and cavernous and like seems inviting, but we're not really meant to be here, or like we can be here, but why would we? There's all this like extra built space in large structures, frequently like airports or malls, where it's sort of, you get this feeling that like, why is this here? It's sort of like in between somewhere and nowhere.
Yeah, it's almost like it is the extra space because I needed A and C, and what connects A and C? It's B. That's what makes up, the white space, but there was no intentionality behind what B looks like.
Yeah, we built this random wing just going through the motions or something like that. And liminal space is sort of like a feeling. Okay, another random TikTok thing is they'll be like, what color is Monday? And people will be like red, and like, what color is Thursday? Purple or whatever. And it's an extension of like the vibe. Like the vibe of a space is sometimes liminal, and you'll know it when you feel it. So Omaha is sort of a liminal space in that way. And this is not an insult. Omaha is a liminal space because a lot of my friends talk about like moving to Europe or moving someplace else. It's in the middle of the country. Like most people, when I say I live in Omaha, they're like, oh, I've driven through it. Like they've never come off I-80. And there's like this sense of going somewhere, but never arriving, or like growing, but never changing. I learned this stat recently that Omaha surpassed 1 million people in like 1890 and then like never got past 2 million. And so I think literally last year, finally for the first time,
we just got past 1 million again. It wasn't
in the metro. Yeah.
Yeah, in the metro. Yeah, okay.
Yeah. I think as a state, though, we got above 2 million. And so there's this weird sense in Omaha of like things are always changing and improving, but it's almost like the tires are sputtering. But like I've only been here 7 years, so like I can't actually speak to like what it was like 50 years ago. But still there's this sense it's a flyover country. But the thing about liminal spaces is that they will host anyone who comes to them. You could talk with 8 of your best friends in a liminal space in a weird conference center, and you could have the most deep conversation ever. And I actually think that quality of a liminal space being so unassuming, not having expectations, creates the opportunity for spontaneity and randomness in play. And so I think Omaha has done that for some people, like the friend group and community that Teresa were a part of. Like one of our friends who I think you have on the podcast is like from Orange County, which is definitely, you would not think of that migratory path. And there's others from elsewhere across the US. A friend from New York City who like worked on Wall Street is now here. But I think that quality of being in the middle space is really great. So you could say sort of in a way that I'm obsessed with Omaha. Like I moved to LA for a year and came back for a reason. And it's not because life is easy, but there's just some quality here about connection and things that I really appreciate. Specifically in Omaha, we have some really awesome local proprietors building and creating really awesome things. And a lot of these are going to be food, but like Dolomiti is like just such an achievement of like pizza in the Midwest. It kind of reminds me of the Chef's Table Pizza episode where like he was in Arizona or Phoenix and he invented cactus rosemary pizza and realized you could grow Italian wheat in Arizona because the climate is kind of similar. And like when you tell people there's good pizza in Arizona, they're like, what? And it's not the same in Omaha, but Dolomiti is really great. And the new riverfront park that they completely renovated it feels like being in Europe or, something like that. It kind of reminds me of Potsdamer Platz in Berlin, just in like the water coming up to all the municipal spaces. So those are a few of my favorites. I'm trying to think if there's anything else. The Sandhill Cranes, that's not an Omaha thing, but it's absolutely stunning and everyone should go experience it.
Fun fact that I have not validated is I think at T&D people were talking about this. Omaha has more pizza per capita than New York City.
That's crazy.
I don't know that it's validated, but someone said it, and we have a lot of pizza.
We have a lot of restaurants too. Like per capita, we have a lot. And I think Minneapolis has the most theater seats per capita in the US or something crazy like that, or like outside New York. There's all these surprisingly like awesome things about the Midwest that you wouldn't realize if you didn't slow down and just sort of, hung out in the liminal space that is for a moment.
I actually have another question for you now, because I want your take on it. I want your perspective. Yesterday, I was talking to Nate Watson, who you've met, and we were talking about the Midwest and how east of the Mississippi, they think they're the Midwest, but yet we think that we're the Midwest and we're completely different. Is the Midwest of Minnesota and the Midwest of Nebraska similar? Are they different? Would you categorize them together at all?
Midwest is funny because it's partially symptomatic of, was it the continental divide out east, like during colonial days?
I don't know the history of Midwest, but I just know no matter what state you're in, they think if they're in, kind of the 10 in the middle, they think they're the Midwest. And I would be like, okay, I lived in Oklahoma. Technically, they're the Midwest, but they act like they're the South.
I was going to say I have a friend from Oklahoma that said the same thing. So the Great Plains is a distinct geography. And like the Dakotas and Kansas and Nebraska, I guess maybe Missouri, probably not, are the Great Plains. I think part of Iowa, maybe like southwestern Minnesota. And so as a distinct geography, like the Great Plains are a real thing. And they are substantially different from like the lush forests and greenery of Ohio or parts of Minnesota and Wisconsin. So geographically or ecologically, they're distinct. Politically, I don't have a strong opinion about calling them the Midwest. I do think I'm a student of life for whatever that means. And like, I do like learning about what makes a place the way it is and seeing distinctly how the Great Plains are so different from like the rolling kettles of Wisconsin or different from the rocky North Shore of Minnesota, just noticing the world. And there's right here, the sunsets are amazing. The sunsets in Omaha, Nebraska, and the fact that there aren't clouds a lot, like so much more beautiful than Minnesota. And like those early fall sunsets are just so gorgeous. And often we'll be having a picnic together for Tuesday night dinner and we'll see this beautiful sunset or text each other photos. And that's a really distinct quality of the Great Plains. So I think there's something to appreciate wherever you are.
Yeah, I love it. Something I appreciate so much about you, like I said in the beginning, is how you question and really consider the world and things. And even during this conversation, how on two different topics and two different occasions, you mentioned how space plays a factor in the way that we show up, sitting in a coffee shop, surrounded by people kind of helping you feel a little bit warm and cozy and secure, or being in these liminal spaces. It's just one of those little lines that really highlights what I appreciate about you. Jack, how can people work with you, just be in your world?
Yeah, you can follow me on Instagram, Jack on a Walk. I don't post a lot, but that's like a decent way to message me if you want. On the business side, any data problems you have, I would love to help you with. Even if you're like, I'm in this Excel spreadsheet and I don't know what I'm doing, or I'm using Tableau and I want help. I just want to help people with data stuff. Like I'm pretty passionate about like humanizing data and all of that. And so you can head over to cloudgrapple.com. There's a little button in the lower right-hand corner that looks like a chat thing, and you can chat with me and it will go to my phone and we can always set up a meeting or a call or something or coffee that way.
Okay, amazing. If you are still with us, go follow and connect with Jack if you are at all interested in understanding your data. Do a demo for Grapple. It truly is so helpful. And send us a DM on Instagram. Send me a voice note at Becoming Obsessed Pod, or text this to a friend that you think it can help so that we can all become a little bit more obsessed with our world. Okay, guys, let's go get obsessed.
See ya. Thanks so much.